In an era where franchising is the grease that lubes up the gears of Hollywood, roles are rarely occupied by just one actor. Whether it's reboots constantly changing the face of your favourite superheroes seemingly every other year, or performers being swapped out of prestige pieces due to boring old scheduling conflicts, there are few roles that are so sacred studios and fans alike couldn't picture anyone else giving their take on them. However, that only makes those rare instances where a character is so perfectly cast, and the synergy between an actor and their role appears so effortless, even better. That overused phrase used by critics to champion an actor of "it was the role they were born to play" might be a little bit meaningless now, but in these cases, yeah, that old saying absolutely holds water. I'm Josh from Whatculture.com, and these are 10 iconic characters only one actor could play. Number 10, Ray Nicolette, Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton has had plenty of roles he's defined, from Batman to Beetlejuice, but it was a surprising turn in Quentin Tarantino's Jackie Brown that he embodied so singularly. In that movie, he plays Ray Nicolette, a hard-ass FBI agent with the weirdest interrogation tactic ever. Namely, he kinda just walks around and then perches on chairs in uncomfortable ways as an intimidation tactic. At least that's what I took from it anyway. However, Jackie Brown was based on the book Rum Punch and was made by Miramax, so when Universal set its own sights on adapting the text's follow-up Out of Sight, they faced the issue of having to cast someone else to play Ray. That said, despite the rights to both works being held by two different studios, rather than cast someone new, Michael Keaton actually returned uncredited to play the role again, partly because old QT himself convinced Miramax to not force Universal to cough up money for the cameo. Number 9, Judy Dench. The James Bond franchise has never really had any qualms with recasting characters. Hell, part of the appeal is that the central hero perseveres across decades via the magic of Hollywood casting agents. Bond's boss and MI6 head honcho has also been a role swapped out to new actors playing successors to the throne. Each version of M is admittedly a different in-universe character, but that makes it even more impressive that the series went to such great lengths to not recast Judy Dench's version, who quickly came to overshadow the rest. Dench's M was introduced in GoldenEye, and the actor's cold, no-nonsense takedown of 007 made her an instant fan favourite. So much so that when the series was rebooted with Casino Royale, the producers asked the actor to reprise her role in a move that could have destroyed the clean break they were striving for. There have been M's before and there'll be plenty after, but this version can never be replicated. Number 8, Ash Williams, Evil Dead. If you've only ever seen the first Evil Dead, you might wonder why Bruce Campbell's Ash Williams has remained an enduring horror icon. In that first flick, he's actually a bit of a meathead, and only survives where his friends died through a good dose of luck. It was the sequel where the character really came into his own though, which was necessary considering the first half of that film is essentially an Ash one-man show. Blending horror and physical comedy in a way few other actors have ever achieved, the first half of Evil Dead 2 is a gauntlet of personal nightmares for Ash, and Campbell captures the manic insanity with gusto. And after being put through the ringer, the second half and subsequent rest of the franchise sees the character transformed into a bumbling yet unwaveringly charismatic action hero, with a chainsaw for an arm and a shotgun for a partner. Like seriously, the lines this dude spouts would have sounded absolutely ridiculous coming out of any other actor's mouth, but Campbell turned them into some of cinema's most memorable. Number 7, the T-800, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Old Arnie Schwarzenegger isn't the only Terminator in James Cameron's classic sci-fi franchise, but he's arguably the only one fans care about. Well, Robert Patrick's T-1000 notwithstanding. He debuted as the villainous T-800 in the first film and then returned for cinema's greatest babyface turn in the sequel, completing his arc and sacrificing himself in Molten Metal, but not before netting another cinematic best in the movie industry's greatest ever thumbs up. At that point, two different versions of Arnie's character had been destroyed, and yet following movies continued to bring him back, even when the actor couldn't turn up in the flesh. Shocked and appalled at the very thought of having either someone else play the T-800 or omitting him entirely, Salvation even CGI'd Arnie into the movie onto the body of another actor. The desire to see him constantly come back is partly because nobody can quite mix mechanical menace and alien endearment the same way as Arnie can. With only a few looks and a couple of lines, the hulking performance was burned into the minds of audiences everywhere, to the point where, for better or worse, there's just no franchise without Arnold Schwarzenegger. He'll always, always be back. Number 6. Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford has such a defining presence and an undying charisma that you could make the argument that pretty much any of his roles could only be played by him. The most notable time someone else jumped into the boots of a character he made famous was Alden Ehrenreich's take on Han Solo in Solo, A Star Wars Story, which pretty much amounted to the actor doing his best Harrison Ford impression for around 2 hours. That obviously did not go down well, and that's partly because Ford brings so much of himself to his defining characters, especially Indiana Jones. There is no franchise without Ford though, and nobody else could embody this lovable rascal of a hero, especially not Shia LaBeouf. Number 5. The Mask Jim Carrey. In a lot of ways, Jim Carrey only really ever plays Jim Carrey in movies, well, with the exception of certain things like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Especially during his peak in the 90s, there was nobody else able to do the kind of outlandish physical comedy the actor made millions perfecting, and his reputation of essentially being a human cartoon made him a perfect match for The Mask. After all, this was a film about a literal cartoon character come to life via the power of a magical mask, and there's nobody in the world animated enough to do that premise justice in live action than the man who became famous because of his rubber face. In this movie, Carey's regular overacting was ramped up even higher, and the ridiculous green makeup only made the comic's unnatural facial contortions all the more hilarious and pronounced. The reason there are few sequels to Jim Carrey movies is that Jim Carrey doesn't like doing them, and even Hollywood recognizes that he is the be-all and end-all of the films he stars in, and that goes double for a character like The Mask. And yes, I am just going to sit here and pretend Son of the Mask just doesn't exist because we're all better off for it. Number 4. Ethan Hunt, Tom Cruise. I've talked a lot so far about actors embodying their characters and blurring the line between performer and role, but nobody takes that quite as far as Tom Cruise in the Mission Impossible series. Though he technically plays a character called Ethan Hunt, a top-level secret agent with a seriously toxic on and off-again relationship with his bosses at the Impossible Mission Force, he really just plays Tom Cruise. Or at least the imagined version of superstar actor Tom Cruise everyone has in their heads. In the run-up to these movies and in the weeks following their release, the focus is never on what's happening to Ethan in the films, but what insane new stunt Cruz has put himself through. The actor insists on doing his own daring stunts, whether that's performing a real-life halo jump, hanging onto the side of a real plane taking off, or putting thousands of hours into getting a flight license so he can correctly pilot a helicopter during action scenes. Cruz's mad dedication to the role is why Mission Impossible remains so successful, and trying to replace him with an actor even half as committed would cause it to self-destruct. Cough, Jeremy Renner, cough. Number 3. Princess Leia, Carrie Fisher. At one point, the idea of recasting the original Star Wars cast with younger actors probably appealed to Disney. Solo was the film that tested the waters on that front though, giving audiences new versions of Han Solo and Lando Calrissian, and while both were interesting takes, especially Donald Glover's Lando, both lived in the shadow of the previous stars. Like I mentioned earlier, it didn't help that the performances of the new actors felt like imitations of what came before. Even without that in mind though, the idea of recasting Carrie Fisher's Princess Leia would have been an incredibly controversial move. Even her silhouette, those buns from A New Hope for instance, that I definitely did not take hairstyle inspiration from, is instantly iconic, and Fisher across the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy brought such heart to the galaxy far, far away. Young Leia has been needed in other movies like Rogue One, but the Mouse House opted to use digital scans of Fisher rather than recast. Number 2. Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. Even though I've hypothesized over the qualities needed to decide whether or not an actor is irreplaceable, often it just comes down to basic maths. Yeah, it might not be that sexy, but it's a concrete method. For instance, the ludicrous amount of money Robert Downey Jr. has earned playing Iron Man is a testament to just how inseparable the actor and hero are, and how much fans have invested in the two being one and the same. For the Avengers, Downey Jr. reportedly took home $50 million, he netted $1 million a minute for Spider-Man Homecoming, and secured a whopping $75 million payday for Avengers Endgame. Put simply, studios just don't pony up that kind of money if they can swap the actor out for someone less costly. Of course, Robert Downey Jr. absolutely knows this. when Tony Stark announced at the end of the first Iron Man that he was the superhero, that wasn't just a statement from the character, but also from the actor playing him. From there on, the two would become inseparable, and though the world of superheroes means there'll no doubt be another Tony Stark at some point, whoever takes the reins will always be living in the shadow of Downey Jr.'s work. Number 1. J. Jonah Jameson, J.K. Simmons. It's so easy to get J. Jonah Jameson wrong. The loudmouth newspaper editor could quickly become abrasive and obnoxious to the point where he simply allowed annoyance in the wrong hands. But he remained a highlight of Sam Raimi's original Spider-Man trilogy because J.K. Simmons plays assholes like nobody else. He was so good, in fact, that when Sony rebooted the Spidey series, they omitted the character entirely rather than try to recast him, because Simmons' take was so entrenched in the minds of fans. Even when a second reboot came around, introducing a new Jonah was put off once again, and nearly 2 full standalone movies went by without the character showing up. However, in the final moments of Spider-Man Far From Home, a news bulletin from the Daily Bugle is displayed all throughout New York, led by none other than Simmons' JJ. Like with Sony and M, which we've already mentioned, the studio risked shattering the clean break of this second reboot by bringing back a character and actor from a previous universe, but it worked a treat. JK is JJ, and fans will happily ignore a continuity blurring appearance to have both him and the character back for good.